In today's episode, we've got collisions so brutal, YouTube won't even let us show the moment of impact in the first 15 seconds of the video. Yep, that's why we do these intros. Well, I think that's enough time. Here we go. Anthony was driving down a Connecticut highway when he watched a mobile crane collide with an overpass right in front of him. The partially extended crane arm smashed into the overpass, knocking a sign down to the highway below. The driver of a sedan barely escaped without damage, while Anthony ran over part of the sign before colliding with a barrier. He told us hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage was done to both the crane and the overpass. Incredibly, nobody was seriously injured in the incident. Anthony's insurance claim is still being processed. This submitter's cousin was driving his Subaru Legacy when he paid the price for attempting an illegal overtake. If you needed a reason not to loan someone else your car, this is a pretty good one. Our submitter's cousin went into the ditch to prevent a head-on collision, launching the car before it collided with the power pole. Obviously, our submitter's Subaru was totaled, and when the police arrived, they cited his cousin for making an improper lane change. Miraculously, nobody was seriously hurt. Our submitter told us he's now in the process of replacing his Subaru Legacy with a Subaru Forester. Eric was on his way to work when he noticed the driver of an SUV toss a cigarette butt out of her window and into the street. She must not have realized the driver right next to her was a police officer, and he noticed her littering too. The officer actually got out of his car and knocked on the SUV driver's window. We're not sure what was said, but the interaction ended with her getting out of her SUV and picking up the cigarette butt. Eric said it was so satisfying. He also told us he's been holding on to this video since 2018. We only show dashcam videos sent to us by our fans, so if you've got a dashcam story to share, send it in using the link in the description. Joe was on his way home from checking to see if a trail was open, and he was carefully making his way down a muddy road on a hill when an SUV driver coming up the hill was right in the middle of the road. The SUV driver stopped to help Joe after he slid and rolled down the hill in his effort to avoid hitting her SUV. Since neither of them had cell service, she left him upside down in his Toyota Tacoma and went to call for help. Around 45 minutes later, Joe managed to get the attention of a passing motorist by honking, and he gave Joe a box cutter so he could cut his seatbelt and get out. 45 minutes after that, first responders arrived. Incredibly, Joe wasn't hurt in the rollover, and he thinks his Tacoma's roof rack protected him from being crushed. He used the $14,000 insurance settlement to replace it with a newer Tacoma. Joe told us our channel convinced him to install a dash cam. If you need one, you'll find our recommendations in the description, along with coupon codes just for Wham Bam fans. Maxwell was driving in the passing lane of a Nebraska highway when two street racing drivers went flying past him. He estimates they were traveling in excess of 100 miles per hour. Maxwell immediately remembered that only moments earlier, he'd passed two law enforcement vehicles sitting in the median. He decided to merge to the travel lane just in case the cops were in pursuit of the scofflaws. Seconds later, a state police SUV with party lights flashing and siren active passed Maxwell. Even though the street racers had tried to lose him by exiting the highway, the cops spotted them and took the same exit. Maxwell doesn't know if the reckless racers were ever apprehended, but what he does know is that he was excited to finally have a dashcam video to send to Wham Bam. Keith was headed to work one morning and was passing through a narrow construction area when he was forced to stop for traffic ahead of him. The driver behind him failed to brake, bailing off the road to avoid a collision. The other driver went off the road and slammed sideways into a tree. Keith stopped to make sure he was okay, and he told Keith his anti-lock brakes had engaged and he'd had to swerve to avoid rear-ending Keith's Dodge Charger. Thankfully, he wasn't hurt, and Keith sent him a copy of his dashcam footage later. He wanted to shout out his wife as well as his father, who also watch our videos. Brian was getting ready to make a left turn from a dedicated turn lane when the driver of a Chevy Trax suddenly swerved into the turn lane, sideswiping Brian's Toyota Camry. Brian told us he never saw the Chevy's turn signal come on. Not that it matters, since a turn signal doesn't give you the right-of-way. Both drivers stopped and contacted the police to get an incident number. After examining the damage, both parties agreed to handle the matter privately and not involve their insurance providers. Brian said, "Get a good dash cam." We couldn't agree more, Brian. Brandon was leaving a parking lot when he spotted a new driver attempting and failing to exit a parking space. Don't worry, we'll speed this one up so you won't have to suffer for too long. After Brandon watched the SUV make contact with a Tesla Model Y, he honked and the driver pulled back into her parking space. Brandon then spoke to her and she actually offered to let him back up her SUV for her. He declined as he didn't want to be held liable for anything else that might go wrong, but he also made sure she knew that the Tesla had recorded the entire event and that she should do her best to contact the owner. He told us he pulled the door handle to trigger a Sentry Mode event, a very smart thing to do, and held up the other driver's phone number to the camera on his phone. He hopes the owner will be compensated for the damage. Huey was running errands after work when he was rear-ended by a van while making a U-turn. Huey told us the van had no license plates and the driver fled the scene after the collision. He filed a police report, but the cops never did locate the van driver, so Huey made an uninsured motorist claim with his own insurance provider. Sadly, the collision totaled Huey's Nissan Versa, but he decided to keep it since it's still drivable, at least until he can afford to replace it. What would you do in this situation? Amina was going to a fall market with her boyfriend when she found herself playing a game of chicken with an oncoming Jeep driver. She had to swerve into the oncoming lane to avoid being rammed head-on by the SUV. Amina reported the incident to the police, but since the Jeep's license plate number never appears in her footage, they told her there wasn't much they could do. She doesn't know what caused this incident, but she's thankful she was able to avoid a collision. She told us that watching our videos every week is what helps her pay close attention to the road while she drives. Chris was following traffic through a green light when he watched an SUV get T-boned after running a red light. The Ford Fusion ahead of Chris clipped the back of the Kia SUV, spinning it over 90 degrees before it skidded to a stop. Chris stopped to see if anyone was hurt, but thankfully there were no serious injuries. He also told us the SUV driver immediately admitted to being distracted by his phone while driving. When police arrived, they declined Chris's dashcam footage, but he gave a copy to the Ford driver anyway. Later on, the Ford driver contacted Chris and told him the Kia driver had changed his story and was now denying fault. The dashcam footage ended up being critical evidence after all. Clive watched two Teslas merge into the same lane at the same time. One way or another, this is today's Tesla behaving badly, but which Tesla driver is at fault?
That Tesla man can't drive. That Tesla man can't drive.
Clive told us nobody appeared injured, and since both vehicles involved were Teslas, he figured the drivers wouldn't need his dashcam footage. Who do you think was at fault here? Let us know in the comments. Check out what happened while Mike was taking his son to football practice. When Mike merged left to go around the pickup truck, the pickup driver did the same. Mike honked, but the other driver panicked and hit the brakes, and Mike's attempt to avoid rear-ending the pickup was unsuccessful. Both drivers stopped to exchange information. Even though the pickup driver accepted responsibility, her insurance provider tried to deny the claim. Until Mike sent them his dashcam footage, that is. He told us they accepted liability within minutes of him sending them his footage. Fixing his GMC Sierra took 3 weeks and cost $11,000 US. Oscar was cruising along at around 70 miles per hour when he suddenly encountered a cyclist who had started to cross the highway in front of him. Thankfully, the lane next to Oscar was clear and he was able to swerve around the cyclist. He pointed out that even though the woman wasn't in the road herself, if he'd hit her bike, she still would have been severely hurt. Carl was driving down a highway in very wet and rainy conditions when a Ford SUV pulled out in front of him without warning, and he was unable to slow down enough to avoid rear-ending it. Carl immediately pulled over and stopped, but he told us the Ford driver left the scene. When Carl called the police, he was able to give them the SUV's license plate number by referring to his dashcam footage. Using this information, the police were able to find the Ford SUV. But for whatever reason, they didn't give the driver a citation. When Carl made a claim with the other driver's insurance provider, they denied the claim. Thankfully, nobody was injured in the collision, but now Carl is waiting to find out how he'll be getting his Chevy Sonic repaired. This submitter was leaving community college when a speeding pickup driver used an exit lane to overtake his Honda CR-V, even though the passing lane was completely empty. When the pickup driver tried to swerve in front of our submitter, they clipped a rear tire on an island, rupturing it instantly. Thankfully, they were able to maintain control and safely pull over without further incident. Our submitter did not consider it necessary for him to stop and discuss the pickup driver's actions with them, but he's hopeful that they learned a valuable lesson about safe driving. This submitter experienced some road rage he says was totally unprovoked after a Ford Taurus driver intentionally blocked him from merging into the right lane. After the Taurus driver swerved in front of our submitter, he overcorrected to avoid a collision before losing control and colliding with the Taurus. The impact disabled our submitter's Lincoln Zephyr. The Ford driver sped off, then returned around 20 minutes later. In spite of our submitter showing the cops his dashcam footage and having a witness on his side, the cops didn't charge the other driver with hit and run. The insurance company determined our submitter's vehicle was totaled and cut him a check for $3,500 US. But he told us he chose to repair his car anyway. Thankfully, there were no injuries as a result of the collision. Kay was headed home after a 12-hour shift when the driver of a sedan made a right on red without stopping, which is both unsafe and illegal, and nearly ran into Kay's Nissan Sentra. After Kay slammed on her brakes to avoid a collision, the careless driver flipped her off. Kay told us she could see her laughing in her side view mirror, evidently amused that she'd nearly caused a wreck. Check out what happened to James on a mountain road that caused this damage to his Chevy Silverado.
Did that hit you?
Yep.
Sadly, his dashcam only caught a few seconds prior to the moment a septic truck sideswiped him as he did his best to get out of the way. Even so, this footage is enough to prove that the other driver had more room than James did. James told us the official report also stated that he'd been speeding, but this footage proved that wasn't true. Once he threatened to sue, he finally received compensation. Regina was headed home from an appointment when she had to slow down for a huge flock of wild turkeys. She told us she watches our videos every week with her 73-year-old mother who also enjoys them. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing so you'll see every new upload in your feed. Then go check out this episode that YouTube says you haven't seen yet. Oh yeah, that's a good one! Or check out this video showcasing some of the worst drivers of California we've seen over on the Wham Bam Tesla Cam channel.
Wham, bam, we got a Patreon, man. Please support the show.